Gocha, and thank you. We look forward to seeing you, and thank you for attending this evening too, Mr. Saville, because you came last week, or last week, feels like last week. But thank you very much for that, and we look forward to seeing you at our subsequent meetings. So we're welcoming one or two people, but I'll just probably the opportune moment to also say to Tom Clark, who's going to be retiring in October, so you may not have the doubtful privilege of seeing another audit meeting.
Unless you have a special.
Unless we have a special. But Tom, think on behalf of everybody, thank you for all your support. Thank you for digging us out and putting us right. That's very good of you. Thank you very much, and may you have a long and successful and enjoyable retirement. And the first thing I'm going to do is to appoint a vice chairman, and I would like to nominate Councillor Stockwell as the vice chairman for the remaining of the year. Is there somebody who would like to support that? Councillor Bell, thank you. Is that carried?
Great.
Thank you very much indeed. Then on that basis, may I ask my vice chairman to read the safety announcement? It's our first duty. Thank you very much.
Building fire alarm signal is a continuous two-tone alarm. On hearing the evacuation alarm, 1, leave the building by the nearest marked exit route. 2, follow the green signs to the assembly point, a large staff car park opposite the entrance to the building. 3, anyone who cannot use the stairs will be helped by the officers present after other people have left. And 4, do not return to the building until told it is safe to do so by an authorised officer. The whole of the council is a no smoking area. Mobile phones must be switched to silent, please.
Thank you very much. Go to item 2, to receive apologies for absence. I have an apology from Councillor Boottrop. Thank you. Then on to item 3, to receive declarations from any members in respect of any matter on the agenda. Not seeing any. Thank you very much. The next item is to confirm the minutes of the previous meeting. Now, before we do that, I thought it might be appropriate on this occasion, because we don't have matters arising as such, but I thought it was appropriate that perhaps Stephen would be kind enough to report in person on one or two matters which I saw were in the last minutes. And so with your agreement, I'm going to ask Stephen to cover those minutes, start again, matters, and when we've finished that, we'll then address signing the minutes, if everybody is agreeable. Okay, lovely, thank you. Stephen.
Yes, if you'd thank you, Stephen Fitzgerald, Interim Head of Finance and Resources. Good evening, members. There were a number of items arising from discussions that we had in the July meeting, and what I'm going to do is try and pick up on each of them here very briefly, but just to try and update members specifically. We talked in item 5, particularly in relation to the internal audit annual report, about issues in respect to revenue and benefits and concerns about high risks there. And we're joined this evening by Simon Hughes, now who has responsibility for that area in the council's current structure. And I just thought I'd like to bring Simon in to say a few words about this at this point, if that's all right.
Thank you, Mr. Hughes. Thank you. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Chairman. And An interim challenge for a former head of digital to switch on a microphone. My apologies, members. As Stephen has said, the responsibility for this action has fallen to me and the new directorate. And following the management restructure, this is being passed to the Assistant Director for Digital and People Services and the Head of Revenues and Benefits and Housing Options. They have two key priorities at the moment. One of them is to work through the strategy on the high-risk recommendations contained in the business rates audit report, as well as picking up the medium recommendations. And then, subject to member approval, the service will use the data analytics from the information we received from the payment of COVID grants to identify ratepayers and then progress that action. So that work is underway. When that is completed, we'll then discuss that with the lead member, cabinet member, and then we can bring that to audit committee as is appropriate. Also important to say that the second priority of the team is to make sure that all COVID and energy rebate grants are paid, reconciled, and audit assurance work is completed to ensure that neither we nor any of our residents or customers are out of pocket. The services, you'll be aware, has paid substantial grants since March 2020. And as the report identifies, they've been extremely busy. So those two priorities are what the team are working on at this point. We'll be able to report back to committee at an appropriate time. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Has anybody got any questions for Mr. Hughes? Councillor Hicks.
Relating to the report, and I noticed it was under the minutes relating to the annual governance statement, particularly thinking of wider issues of cybersecurity and how that affects the governance of the council generally. Perhaps Simon could just outline a bit more details about what is going on there.
Mr. Hughes, thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. Yes. On cybersecurity, we've just received the draft Cyber 360 report. So as you recall, we're working closely with the LGA and the Cabinet Office to look at our cybersecurity arrangements. I say we've just received, literally today, just received that. One of the things that's included within that is to look at suppliers and to do an audit of suppliers. I can even turn to the recommendation that we've received, so that we will look at formal supplier security management arrangements, and then we'll be able to risk assess what they present and what action we'll need. And I'm aware of the cybersecurity attack that has lasted, I think, for 3 months on our partner that delivers housing options. And what we already do is we do some of that audit for our suppliers of software and where we have information hosted, and we're extending that to cover all services where there could be a risk of cybersecurity attack. And then we'll also be looking at what are their business continuity arrangements and what might that mean for us in terms of how we respond. So that work is recommended for us to do, and we have frameworks from the National Cybersecurity Centre and also from good practice from the Cabinet Office, which we've been supplied with and doing joint work with to address that. So we will, once we've been through the draft report and finalised that about the Cyber 360 review, we'll be able to come back to the Audit Committee after meeting the Cabinet member to say, this is the action we're taking and this is how we envisage to mitigate any risks. Is that?
I'm content, Councillor Hicks. If I might just ask on that matter, will you be involving matters as an overview, because it's ultimately an audit, internal audit matter, I would suggest as well. And when you say the cabinet, do you mean the MSDC cabinet or do you mean a cabinet in number 10 Downing Street? Could you elucidate, please?
Certainly. So, yes, we look at the Cyber 360 report and we include internal audit reports on cybersecurity, and one is recently underway and we're looking through the recommendations for that. So our response to cybersecurity will combine all of that work, so it'll be thorough, and then we'll also share that as part of internal audit, our action plan and what we intend to do to address that. The reason is that the internal audit work is different to the work that the Cyber 360 have focused on. So internal audit looks at some of our systems, some of our protocols, and then Cyber 360 looks at the other side, if you like, of cybersecurity, which is people, what people know, how they respond, how they're prepared, and then also broader arrangements outside the organisation. So those two sets of work are very complementary and should give us a comprehensive approach to cybersecurity. And I would say that that is, it probably goes almost without saying that that is critical for us, because certainly what is happening globally, and we're obviously no different, is increasing cybersecurity attacks that are sponsored by states. And they're specifically designed to damage public services.
All services.
Yeah.
Thank you. Has anybody got any more questions on that subject? Councillor Gibson, thank you.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. Mr. Austin was kind enough to share with me the corporate risk register in connection with the item that's coming up later. But I noticed that the way that the corporate risks are laid out are in terms of impact and likelihood. I just wondered, to what extent do we actually take account of financial impact within that impact statement? Because a lot of the impact statements seem to me to be the impact on delivering our services per se, rather than, if you like, but would have no negligible financial impact. So when you're actually talking about the impact within audit, about tackling the high ones first, how is it you're deducing that? Which are the high ones? Does that question make sense within the way in which we measure impact in a risk assessment?
Thank you, Mr. Hughes.
Yes, it makes that question makes complete sense, and yes, one of the things that we consider is the financial impact, both principally of recovery of systems, and that can, as you'll appreciate, vary dramatically depending on whether you're looking at complete loss of data, complete loss of a system, complete loss of access to systems. So we do work that through, and that then informs our cybersecurity action plan, and it also informs the systems that we purchase, and also how regularly we back up data, and also have potentially other systems that could be spun up in order to provide a service immediately. All those things have costs. All of those things we are working through and reviewing regularly as vulnerabilities are assessed. I think it's fair to say that has to be revisited as new types of cyber threats arise, and you'll be aware of that, I'm sure, with recent information around some of the services where data and systems have been completely wiped, and therefore rebuilding a system and trying to get the data back operating has taken months and months and months for both the public and private sector. So absolutely we look at those risks.
Are you content, Councillor Gibson?
Yes, I mean, I think the cloud is a terrible idea, and it's the cloud that leads us into these problems.
Well, yes, thank you. And I understand the different sorts of cyber attack we're getting, because the gaming people, they've had their source code hacked yesterday, didn't they? Which would be quite fundamental to a number of things, and presumably our source code can be hacked as well.
Luckily, it's not our source code. We have very little of that. It's normally our suppliers, and that's exactly why we need to look at the cybersecurity risk, because that's debilitating for both our supplier and for those that they provide services to. Yeah. It's
So the
bit more
SLA
serious than a
agreement
game,
will be
yeah.
of great interest to you then as to
Yes.
whose responsibility is which. All right, thank you. We've got some others, but before we move on, is everybody content that we've discussed that then? Stephen, you're going to do item 6, review of treasury management activity.
Yes, so there were a number of items that came up under the discussions on treasury management, and colleagues from Ada and Worthing, do feel free to come in if I don't express these quite as technically correctly as they need to be. But the first one, I think perhaps in many ways the most fundamental, was related to the service level that we have with service level agreement that we have with Ada and Worthing. And as I think we discussed very briefly, and I'll say a bit more substantively tonight, the current agreement is coming to a conclusion. So there will be a decision for Mid-Sussex as to whether we can continue with the current shared arrangements that we have with Ada and Worthing, or indeed do something else. So in terms of moving that forward, I think when we come to the November meeting of this committee, I would propose that we have a report which presents the options and the relative financial implications of those options to the committee to give officers a steer on the decision and the direction that we want to take going forward. I wouldn't propose to go into too much detail tonight about the pros and cons, but obviously members will see that the options relate to a continuation of a shared service agreement, or effectively for moving to an in-house arrangement, which is probably what Mid-Sussex had some years ago. But we will explore all these in more detail when we come to November, so that members can make a decision. So that is perhaps the most substantive thing. On other matters, I think we've circulated today a short Q&A brief on 2 questions that were asked at the July meeting. One related to over and under borrowing, and we have laid out the position with over and under borrowing. I think the terminology here is perhaps, although it's generally used in the field, is perhaps a little bit opaque to some of us, and possibly including me. But it's basically a reflection of the position in relation to the capital financing requirements, and that is basically what the term members have in front of them, the current position on that, and I hope that's reasonably clear in that briefing note. So that was the over and under borrowing position. There was also an apparent discrepancy within the report, which I think actually, as I've put again in the briefing note, wasn't a discrepancy, but really 2 different things being described in perhaps slightly similar ways, which gave the impression there might be a discrepancy. But what we've done in the briefing note is presented a reconciliation which demonstrates that actually the report is indeed correct, and that reconciliation explains those differences. So I think those were the things specifically on treasury management that we needed to pick up tonight.
Thank you, Stephen. Has any councillors got any questions on those comments? Got any questions? No, I don't think so. Thank you. Then, thank you. Just as a little bit of guidance for when you come back to us next time, things which we would be interested in is your relation and contractual relationship all the way through, and where does the buck stop if the advice turns out to be poor. So if you could just sort of concentrate on that too, that would be of great interest to us. And thank you very much. That then brings us on to item 7. Stephen, it's you again.
Well, this was
Sorry. Okay.
item 7 of the July minutes related to the 2021 accounts sign-off. And as members will know, an objection was placed with the external auditor on this particular issue and has been ongoing. So far as these 2021 accounts, I pursue this issue with our external auditor actually only today. What has happened in recent months, he's asked for comments and further information from the council, which we have provided, and that has been done. He's also asked for further clarifications from the objector, and that has been provided. He is now reflecting on all the, if you like, the written submissions that have been made, and he is bound to issue his final decision on whether the objection is rejected or upheld shortly. But that decision has not yet been issued, and I did chase this up today.
Stephen, thank you very much. Have councillors got any questions on that reply? The only comment I would make is that this item has really been a bit like coming from Bleak House and Jarndyce versus Jarndyce, where the court case was 25 years and no resolution. But I was just wondering perhaps if we would feel that we could hope that by the end of next meeting, for the next meeting, that would be resolved. Councillor Gibson.
Essentially the same point, Mr. Chairman, just whether or not Mr. Fitzgerald had any idea when he was going to get a, if you like, white smoke or grey smoke.
I think one thing I would say on this issue, I mean, I've worked in local government finance for over a long time now, but objections to accounts are quite a rare thing. And what I can say is all the material that the external auditor has requested from us, and I believe from the objector, has been provided. And I cannot see that, and there has been a significant amount of it, I can assure you. So I struggle to see how there could be any more information could add to the quality of his decision. So I am expecting that this will be issued in advance of the next committee and hopefully fairly shortly now. But obviously, external auditors have a wide range of clients, they're dealing with a wide range of issues, so sometimes we have to be a bit patient. But I think now probably we're very close to getting a final decision, I hope.
Councillor Cornish.
Thank you. You kind of answered my question in your last couple of sentences, but I just wondered what if the delay continues, what implications would there be if we go into October and beyond? Are there any significant implications with that?
I think the main implication is the frustration of not having closure on this 2021 set of accounts. Are there other consequential difficulties? Probably not great ones. I mean, there are, including government departments, frankly, in some cases, accounts are not closed for years and years, and the departments still carry on functioning. Now, I don't think this is a very desirable position, and the obviously the general view in local government is that we close and get accounts signed off as quickly as possible. But in a sense, this delay now really does sit with the external auditor rather than anything he's waiting for from us.
Thank you very, very much, and you're content, Councillor. I think we did discuss at one of the meetings as to how significant it was, to the extent would there ever be a question of qualifying the accounts, and that was robustly comment on that it would not. It was a mere technicality rather than significant. Stephen, you've done item 8, governance, haven't you? So you've done that.
Yes,
Yes,
we did that,
yeah.
Simon.
Yeah, so that's all done. Now, on that basis, would council, because I wasn't at the last meeting because I had the pleasure of having COVID, but am I now in a position to sign those minutes on your behalf? Thank you. I think we need to record that on the screen. No, I don't. No, we get a blurb, but...
You weren't at the meeting, so we can't vote anyway.
I wasn't at the meeting either. I've got 2 positives on there.
Well, one might accidentally be mine, and I certainly wasn't there. Are we able to say who's voted?
I think the 2 that were here have voted.
Have they? Right, so that's... Can we comfortably say that's carried then, and we're all agreed? Yeah. Lovely. Excellent. Thank you very much.
Councillor Gibson wants.
Councillor Gibson, thank you.
Just on a point of order, Mr. Chairman, even the new constitution allows you to take a vote by hand.
Thank you for pointing that out. We may be there we may well be there under item 6. but meanwhile, under item 7, consider any items the chairman agrees to take as urgent business, and I have none. So that's going to bring us on to item 6, which is local authority investment criteria.
And if, thank you, Chairman, if I keep this off, and then I'll ask perhaps colleagues from Ada and Worthing to come in and sort of give a little bit of greater detail. One of the standard practices which most local authorities do is to maximise their treasury income and to also assist other local authorities in terms of the management of their cash, is to do make investments with other local authorities over a short, medium or occasionally a long-term basis. This is, in my experience, universal practice in all local authorities, and that we make these investments and take these loans in order to help the public sector manage its cash flow on a, if you like, on a macro basis. So this is a really, really common practice. However, and one of the really good things about this practice, I think, is it's a very low risk practice, because I think it's fair to say, and if colleagues correct me, please do, but there's never been a situation where a local authority has defaulted on a financial arrangement with another local authority. So it's about as pretty close to no risk as it gets in the world of investment. So it's generally considered to be good, profitable and desirable practice. But one of the things that is, I suppose, an escalating issue is government interventions in local authorities who perhaps get into budgetary difficulties. And I think what's really quite important in this is to say budget is actually different from cash flow. I mean, in terms of investments, your risks are that should a local authority run out of cash and they couldn't meet the requirements of their agreement, then there would be a difficulty. This is somewhat different to budgetary difficulties, and one of the things that members may have had seen about Croydon and the granting of credit approvals and capital financing issues. It's a different issue. Obviously, it means local authorities are having difficulties, but it's not necessarily a cash flow difficulty. It may be more a budget or a capital financing difficulty. And I think that's important to make that emphasis. However, in terms of what we're doing here in mid-Sussex, the impression I have got in the discussions I've had in the authority in my time here is people are seeking a low-risk approach to investment. And those of you that, like me, remember the Icelandic banking collapse will see the desire in that. So what we're suggesting here is tightening our lending criteria to, in the future, excluding those authorities that are subject to central government intervention. And particular instances that come to light are probably Slough, Croydon, Liverpool, often which have different interventions. A little while back, Northamptonshire, as it was then, and also Peterborough is another one. I suppose this comes to light particularly because we do have a material but modest investment in Thurrock, which of course those of you that follow this on the internet or whatever will see that following a government intervention, Essex County Council has been asked to come and effectively take control of their finances. While I am not specifically concerned that our particular deposit, which currently lies at about 2 million, is at risk and matures in 2023, I think with the escalation of the number of interventions, there is merit in tightening the criteria so that we don't make future deposits with authorities experiencing interventions. And that's really what this report is about, and asking you to note and indeed approve that action that we would be taking for the future. At which point I'll stop and ask if Joel or Joseph wish to add anything to that.
Yes, I just wanted to, I'm sure Stephen will agree with this, but maybe he didn't allude to it. But it's not just about getting the best yield. What we attempt to do is diversify the investment. So that's why we don't put it all in building societies or banks. And investing in other local authorities is just another way of diversifying the counterparties. I'd also say that over the last couple of years, with the extra balances that we've been holding from, well, some capital receipts and the advances that the government have made for the grant disbursements, it's meant that we've actually struggled to find counterparties in order to stay within those limits that we've set within the TMS. So anyway, let's just give you a little bit of background on why we've, we've always used other local authorities, but that's part of the background of why we've used them recently. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Joel, have you got anything you'd like to add to that?
Yes, please. Thank you, Chairman. Just to add a bit of context, obviously the new policy is not to invest in councils under intervention. At the point Thurrock was invested, we weren't aware that there was issues. So to give you some reassurance, I guess, in the event that that happens again, the Local Government Act 2003 outlines recovery, and there is quite strong rights to recovery, even through revenue if needed, for a local authority. But as Stephen said, the history of sort of government action around council failure is always some form of keeping that council afloat. Other councils have a risk score of 1, which is equivalent to government credit on that basis. So they are considered extremely low risk. And we've taken advice from Link Advisory as well, and they agree on that fact.
Thank you. Councillors, are there any questions you would like to pose? Councillor Gibson.
Thank you, Chairman. A couple of questions, in fact 3 questions, I think. The first is just what due diligence do we do when we look at this? Secondly, if it's higher risk, do we get higher return? Is that something which we should build into it? And the third point is really, I can't remember if I mentioned this last time, but the SLA that we've got with Adair and Worthing, it was extended for a further 3 years from the 18th of October 2019. And I just wonder, you know, sort of what are we doing about that during, as 19th of October 2022 is coming at us at quite a pace. And that leads me to the question, which is really, presumably you're also looking after other councils within this framework, and really, do they have the same, are they talking about the same changes?
Joel, I'm going to ask Stephen if he would like to answer the first part of that, because we discussed it some weeks ago, because I too noticed that October is October.
Yes, I mean, the advantage of a service level agreement as opposed to in a shared arrangement with colleagues from another local authority is, in comparison to, say, a contract with a fully private sector provider, is we have a degree of flexibility, and as I said earlier, it gives the timetabling is perhaps a little askew, but we have scope for flexibility, so we can come back to you in November and allow you to make a decision on what you think is a reasonable way forward, while still keep the show in the road for that rather short time from when the SLA effectively might expire and when we actually have our audit committee meeting. So I think that is not going to be a huge difficulty for us in that. So that is the approach that I was suggesting we pursue here. I think in terms of due diligence, you also, in terms of all our investment strategy, there is proper due diligence. I think with established local authorities, in a sense, doing that is much easier than if you were investing in some other sort of security or money market fund or whatever, just by the very statutory nature of local authorities. And indeed, Joel has already referred to that just now. So I think we do our proper diligence, but the nature of local authorities makes them, in many ways, the lowest risk of counterparties. Because if you take the example of Thurrock, for instance, even if we have this situation where they're effectively being managed through Essex County Council finance, Thurrock District Council will continue to exist until such time as, unless they make a choice to reorganise as some other areas have done. So in that sense, you can guarantee that there's a good degree of solidity. So if you perhaps look, probably the most famous financial failure I remember is the Derek Hassan Liverpool time of some years ago. I'm afraid I can't remember the exact year of this, and that was probably the closest to any authority came to actually effectively running out of money, certainly in the time of my career that I recall. And Liverpool has had difficulties after that event, but Liverpool City Council is indeed still there, still functioning, and still taking deposits in terms of inter-authority dealing. Sorry, that was a little bit of a ramble, but I hope that makes the point.
Thank you. Joel, have you got any comments you'd like to add?
Yes. Thank you, Chairman. Just to address the risk-reward question, I guess largely we're looking more cash flow related and sometimes wanting that investment back with quite a lot of certainty. So as Stephen's alluded to already, we're extremely risk averse in the way we act. So we wouldn't necessarily chase the higher reward of lending to riskier authorities. What we tend to get offered is offers from brokers looking to either place money or borrow money. We then inquire as to what counsel is actually behind that offer, because it's not always forthcoming, and then we do our research on that before we make any decision.
Thank you very much. I think Councillor Gibbons, it's normal comment applies, doesn't it? That if it's too good to believe, it probably is. But I think probably, if I might, you're going to come back for us next time. There's a couple of things which have come up in that conversation. As I see, the words due diligence came up, and I know that you also deal with link, and I think it would be Council would be interested to know what our relation with you is, and then what your relation is with link, and the due diligence, and perhaps perhaps it's just personal, everybody else probably knows, but we're all saying that the council can't fail, but ultimately, where would this council be in the pecking order? In other words, do other people get paid? Don't answer it now, it's to come back, but it'd be part of your presentation. I suppose it's almost a sales pitch as to why we should continue to use you. But if effectively, where are we in the pecking order? And whilst I think Stephen is absolutely right as to in item 2 in the summary as to what we're not going to do, but if it can never fail, then why should we worry? But of course there is a worry, and that's what I think I'm asking you to come back with as part of your pitch for next time. That would be interesting. I hope it won't be too boring for other councillors who know the answers, but I don't, so I thought I'd share it with you. So, now, before we go to the recommendation, is there anybody else who would like to make a comment on it at all? Then, councillors, I'm going to go to the summary, which is, I'm not going to read that out. The summary is as set in item 2 there. And the recommendation of the committee is requested to note the contents of the report. And I think we're being asked to signify that on the screen, assuming that it all works. Good to go? I thought I had.
Have I done that? Was that you? Need to indicate your vote.
I thought I'd press this twice.
Press these
Oh, sorry. Thank you. How about that? Lovely. Contact. We have So are we looking for the result on this? Oh, it's just come up, thank you. Right, so that's agreed. So now on to item 7. Well, floor is yours.
Excuse me.
Sorry.
Our friends from Ada, are they going to stay forever?
Ah,
Thank you, Chair. Yes, before presenting the proposed plan for this financial year, I'd like to give a brief update on our last report presented in July on last year's activity. So since the last committee meeting, we have finalized 2 reports that were at draft stage. These were payroll and housing benefits audits. And we also issued draft reports for the 2 IT audits that were reported as being in progress back then. It is worth mentioning that the result of this progress do not have an impact or change our annual opinion given in July. That was the update I wanted to give on the July report, and now moving on to tonight's report concerning the 22-23 plan. It would be good to start with some background information for members' reference. As you would know, we took over the internal audit function from Crawley in August last year. At that point, an audit plan was already approved by this committee, covering 3 years from 2021 up to the 23-24 financial year. We delivered the approved 21-22 plan, but we revisited this plan for the 22-23 financial year to confirm that our work remains relevant from a risk perspective and to allow for an efficient use of resources. As a result, we have replaced some areas and included new audits in this year's plan. In terms of the strategy and the development of this year's plan, again, we took a risk-based approach that involves reviewing aspects such as key risks from service areas drawn from their business plans, which are referred to as corporate risks in the table in Appendix A1, any outcomes of the work we've done previously, and input from the management team at the council. The proposed areas of coverage are set out in Appendix A1, which falls under page 18 of the agenda. From a resourcing perspective, the number of days proposed has not changed from that of the 3-year plan approved in March 2021. We are comfortable that both the extent of coverage and the resources within the plan will enable us to provide the required annual opinion at the end of the 2022-23 financial year. And as a final point, I'd like to confirm that we already allocated auditors and resources to deliver the work detailed in Appendix A1, and we aim to start delivering work from November onward. That's all I wanted to say about this paper, but I am happy to take any questions. Thank you.
Questions? Councillor Gibson.
Thank you, Chairman. Couple of questions. Just really, I think 12 is a strange number and it appears a lot. But obviously, 12 days is what indicative days that's down there. That prompted me to think, is this an ongoing process that runs through the year, or do you tackle these areas as what in project management might be called sprints in order to get to a conclusion on each item? And the other point which Mr. Hughes might want to mention is just as a reference to internal effort. Now, I know that the council doesn't run a recharging system, but I just wondered if we had any idea about the level of internal effort that was supporting this. There may, for instance, be a ratio between the external effort and the internal effort, which is helpful.
Thank you. Well,
Thank you, Councillor, for the questions. Just to double check, when you refer to the audits in the program as being part of a cyclical program, do you mean if we perform an ongoing assurance on those activities or areas? Because from our point of view, what we do is a one-off snapshot in time of that activity or service area, but I'm not really sure if I got your question right.
What I was trying to convey was whether it ran throughout the year and you reached a conclusion at the end, or whether you had a 2-week sprint on an area, followed by a 2-week sprint on another area, followed by every other area.
It is actually the latter. Yes, that's what we do. It's not that we carry on for 6 months reviewing the area. We just finish it in approximately a 2-week time frame, and then we deliver a conclusion. Thank you. The second question was about the internal effort supporting the development of the plan. So just to give you an update on a series of events of how I built together this plan. I presented initially to the management team with the proposal of starting a plan for 22-23 based on previous results from our work, previous results from the previous or former internal auditor, the risks that the areas detailed in their business plans, and any changes in the control environment in the council. I received input from the management team, which the council executive attended the meeting as well. After receiving that input and coming with a list of potential work, I have discussed this potential list with Mr. Fitzgerald as the head of corporate resources, and we come to the final list. In terms of input from the external audit team, there is the option to actually build information from their opinions or views, but even though it is an option, it's not something we actually factored in developing this year's plan.
are you content, Councillor Gibson, or have you an additional question?
On that second point, I would like to come back, Chairman. It's just really to know, in supporting this, I mean, I'm well aware that when officers support councillors, for instance, there's a time penalty within that. And it was really to try and get some element of the internal cost in terms of whether it was 1 man year or half a man year or something like that, and just really to understand exactly what the level of internal support was for the audit. Maybe Mr. Fitzgerald can help with that one.
I think I can help. I don't think I can answer you tonight. I mean, I think in looking at this, in some of these situations, in terms of internal mid-Sussex time that is taken up, if you like, by informing the internal audit process, it may depend rather on the nature of the audit, because some which might be more time intensive, whereas others may be a little bit more routine and not take up so much time. What I would suggest, Councillor, is we take this question away and have a little think about it, because I think you're right. I think you can do a bit of ratio analysis on this and probably come up with a reasonable indication of what the internal support is in terms of days. And I think that's probably a case of one of them, myself, putting our heads together, perhaps with other colleagues, and saying, well, based on our previous experience of the contribution that people have had to make, what do we think a reasonable estimate is about how much staff time needs to be allocated for that? But I do think there's also, and we will do that and take delivery of that tonight. I think there's also an important note and something that we're trying to develop here about internal audit isn't something that's kind of perhaps a little bit tedious that comes along and takes everybody off the day job and all those sort of things. But I think we're trying to develop with what one has been talking about, the risk-based approach, is something that's actively contributing to the improved, if you like, performance of the council, and actually has a gain in terms of economy and efficiency as well as governance. So in a sense, the fact that people are giving up, say, X amount of days to contribute to an internal audit doesn't mean that that isn't time that adds value to that particular area of the council activities. So I think it's actually a good question and quite a complex one, but I think we can give you some initial sort of numerical stuff, but I would also emphasise some of this is perhaps an art as well as a science, and it's how the internal audit process drives the economy and efficiency of the council.
Councillor Hicks.
Chairman, it was just about the changes in the strategic risk assessment and how that impacts on your audit plan in terms of maybe amending or updating it, and thinking particularly about supplier risk and the current economic situation where we're seeing maybe a lot more business risk being built in, particularly around energy costs, and thinking about the position of the council where a lot of our services are outsourced, and for example, the leisure centres, a big increase in energy costs, and the risk that poses to the council. I see in terms of IT business continuity, but is the general business continuity plan on your list?
Thank you.
Taking that last bit of your question, and thank you for the question, there is actually an ongoing advisory piece of work being delivered in terms of business continuity plans, which is, I can give an explanation on what it entails, maybe not in detail, but it's actually Mazars reviewing business continuity plans currently at the council and providing potentially an opinion or any best practices on how it can be developed if it's needed, or it can be updated if it's needed. Now, on the plan side and whether we actually consider anything on supplier risks, I think it's worth saying that even if we approve an internal audit plan tonight with this list of potential areas, the plans are dynamic in nature, and there is actually, we have built in or factored in contingency days where we can actually react or allocate any specific types of work, including, in this case, we can actually deliver anything on supplier resilience and the risks behind supplier failure, or any of the risks behind suppliers that are key to the council. So if that is actually of interest, we can definitely revisit the plan and add it into the list, where I will have initial discussions with any business unit leaders or the head of corporate resources, and we can amend the plan and come back to this audit committee and explain why we had any changes made to the plan during the year. So I'm not really sure if I'm answering the question, but I'm happy to discuss.
No, that's fine. Really, I'm just raising the issue, and I think it's becoming a much greater risk for the council. And as I said, particularly around the leisure centres, perhaps.
Thank you. Stephen.
Just, Councillor Hicks, one further point I would make, which perhaps is a little tangential related to this, but you mentioned cost of living crisis issues and the cost of energy. One thing I'd point out is at the cabinet meeting, which had to be cancelled due to the death of Her Majesty, but we have a report going up, which is talking about the budget guidelines and also the budget monitoring report. And in those reports, in terms of a risk of these new spending pressures, we have factored those factors into those reports. So the increase of cost of energies and other factors we are taking account of in our financial planning going forward. But of course that meeting was postponed and those reports will be discussed on Monday.
Thank you. If I may come back on that.
Please do.
I did notice though the full income from the leisure centres is included in that in the projections. So I just wonder how much we're taking off on the other side in terms of that income not materialising.
Yes, I mean, we thought quite carefully about that, and on the basis of advice that I've had from the service area, that is a reasonable assumption to make at this point in time. Obviously, we realise that there are potential difficulties. For instance, we don't know what the COVID situation will be like in winter this year and what effect that might have. It might be fundamentally mitigated, or we might be back where we were previously in winter, so we don't know. And obviously that has a knock-on effect to the leisure centre income. I think our best estimate is to keep that assumption in at least this stage. What is mitigation if that assumption is incorrect? I think mitigation is the relatively robust financial position of the council means that we can draw on resources if we have shortfalls in income which are not what we predicted.
Are you content, Councillor Hicks? I'm not looking to lead you, but your question was about leisure centres, and presumably we're waiting to see what government support is going to be to industry across the board, because one of the biggest expenses for leisure centres is going to be heating the swimming pools. And so presumably that's really part of your question. I'm not looking to lead you, but I think it's significant but it's something that we can't answer until the government has set out their stall on the matter.
That's right, although my understanding is that may only be for 6 months in terms of businesses, so it's still very uncertain, as you say.
Yeah. So we have 2 more meetings, don't we? One in April.
Yeah, yes.
So we might perhaps revisit that then. There's no point looking at it before then, because everything will be revealed. Councillor Stockwell.
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, I just have a couple of little minor questions, really. In your report on your page 2, so page 16 here, you say the identification of other resources of assurance, so that when you're looking at doing the audit, you're looking elsewhere to see that, we looked at in good light, I suppose. What sort of people? Who are you asking of these questions of? So I'd like a little idea of where you go for that. And secondly, picking up with Councillor Gibson's questions about the hours taken up by the council officers in terms of the audit, I noticed that you said in here that most of your reports are everything's done online. Now, I'm assuming that is because there's still a lot of officers working from home. And does this actually cause a delay in getting stuff back to your team to do the work? Because if information is actually held here in the office and they're somewhere else, then there's obviously there must be some form of delay there. And has this been factored in? How is that working for you?
Thank you for the questions. In terms of the first one, yes, we could place reliance on any other work undertaken. I think what we're trying to say here is that we will try to duplicate efforts if we actually think there's no need to review or redo some audit testing if there is any information available out there. But it's not an automatic decision, so we will. I never had the situation where, even though there was some internal work being done, we won't place any. We will consider it, but we may not place reliance on that work because that's our main objective. Just give an independent view and opinion on a specific area. I think the wording again is there to consider, but it never happened previously. But we will consider anything that it's ongoing, either by the area, by the council, or maybe any work being undertaken by a contractor or a supplier. We will consider that on the basis of avoiding duplication of efforts and making an efficient use of resources. In terms of the second question, I believe in the past 2 years we really shifted the way we delivered audits. It's actually more efficient, and I think it not only changed on our side, but it also accelerated the local authorities and officers just to digitalize everything. I think now we actually proved last year that we delivered every single audit remotely, either via Microsoft Teams, screen sharing arrangements. We set up a secure portal where information can be just dropped by officers in the council, and it's very efficient, and it's actually less time consuming. So that's a positive thing that the pandemic left us. Thank you.
Are you content?
Yes, I think so. I'm content with the answer. More or less.
Councillor Cornish.
Thank you. I just wondered on points 11 and 12 on the IT audits. I just wondered what that scope is dependent on, and I suppose given the importance of what Simon Hughes was saying earlier about the importance of that, is there, when does that come into play, given the importance on that, I guess?
Yeah, that's a very good question. Thank you, Councillor. Yes, so those two audits, number 11 and 12, are actually there because of the result of our audit needs assessment. That is actually a draft report now with Simon's team. So after we finalize that report, our specialist team in our digital services team will meet with Simon's team and the relevant officers to draw a scope and deliver the work. So in terms of timescales, we are now entering into Q3, and we need to deliver all the audits in this plan before March or by March. So without giving you a very specific date, I can just assure you that these two audits will be delivered, scoped and delivered either in Q3 or 4. Sorry for not being more specific.
I think it's just useful to know that it's imminent. And
it is.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you.
And you're content? Thank you. Nobody else? Councillor Hicks.
Yes, sorry, Chairman. Just on that last point, it would be useful perhaps to have an indication of when we might get reports to the committee back on these. You've listed the list of actions, but not when we might receive them as a committee. I don't know whether that will be possible at this stage.
Not at this stage. What I have at this point in time is actually allocated resources for every single audit in the list, which I didn't have when I issued the report to Democratic Services. But with a November start date, it depends when we finalize the field work. So every single audit has indicative days, and it doesn't mean we will spend 12 working days or 15 working days to deliver the work, but it also depends how quickly we get the evidence from the services. I can't tell you now when the drafts will be issued, because not only it doesn't only depend on us or our resources, but also the services providing the evidence, agreeing to the findings, issuing a report. But what I can say is that every single audit and every single report should be issued as a draft at least by March. And I'm sure most of them will be finalized by then. But at this point in time, it's very hard to say a date. Thank you.
Content. Well, thank you for your comments and your fulsome replies. I think the report that you've put here together is excellent. I don't think that we've had such detail set out before. So I'm assuming that you've had an overview as to matters that you think not necessarily wrong or anything the matter with it, but areas that you need to look at to make sure that things... I'd just like some assurance that the list of matters that you have there that you're going to look at is not constrained by way of fee. In other words, you've looked at the organisation and you've identified areas where you believe that it needs to be looked at from an audit point of view, but you haven't had your work cut down and saying, sorry, we can't afford that.
No, it wasn't the case, just to confirm. If we actually take a few examples from the work delivered by the former auditor and the work we delivered last year, we actually took out a few audits where they provided substantial assurance with no recommendations. We went the year after and we had the same outcome, so we decided just to leave those out and maybe just allocate we don't have limited resources either on our side or at the council, so we really need to focus in delivering those audits that potentially will add the most value. But no, there was no constraints or limitations. So we as a base, we took the amount of days in the previous plan drawn up by the former auditor, and using that base of days, we just tweaked the list of the audits there, prioritizing where potentially we can add more value and just addressing potential high-risk areas across the council.
Okay, thank you. And something which was in one of the earlier reports that you made last quarter's report, that on a number of occasions you raised the concern that when you inquired of questions, they were not answered because there were not people in place to reply to it. And I'm just asking that and probably that's to Simon's question as well, that it's now adequately resolved, that there are people there, because it just struck me as a lack of resilience with 2 or 3 spots there in your previous report where you said that there wasn't anybody who answered the question, so we moved on.
I don't recall any scope limitations in terms of people not being available to address our requests or evidence requests. Apologies if I'm...
No, that's all right. Well, it did appear a couple of times and it just sort of gave me a resilience situation. But if you're comfortable, that's all we need to know. And then on item 6 there, where you said you're identifying the weaknesses, but I'm assuming that you will give recommendations of mitigation as well on page 12. Risk management implications, 6 and 6.1. So I'm just saying that you will give your views on mitigation as well, rather than saying there's a problem and leaving other people to sort it. You'll give your view as to how it might be sorted.
Yes, it is outside of our responsibility to actually implement a recommendation, but we can give opinions on what we think it might be the best way forward.
Yeah, as to how it might be resolved.
Exactly, it's up to management then to implement what we consider is necessary.
Okay, thank you. And then I did happen to read the small print. And I'm looking on page 15, point 02, background. And I thought it was interesting as to how you saw the interaction between yourselves and this committee. And in particular, you're saying there, the audit, following considered approval of the Council Audit Committee. I would suggest that we haven't seen that before, and I'm not suggesting that it's not right. In fact, I would welcome it. But I'm just wondering, perhaps next time when you come, even if it is just by bullet pointing, as to what your expectations are of us. As we have expectations, but that's what you're very clearly saying, it's interaction. So what would you be looking at for us, because it's a teamwork basis. It's not a them and us, it's a teamwork. So I think I'd be quite interested to know what your expectations are, because I don't think they've been set out by the previous auditors. So I think that would be interesting. Councillor Stockwell.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. Juan, following on from the conversations, I was just lost on that thought. Just bear with me a second. Where was I going? I completely lost it.
Would you like me to ask another question?
No. No, I'll get there. Oh, yes, I know. You were talking about the where you've looked at your timetables and what you put into the schedule, and you've taken some things out and you put some things in, which is great. No problem with that. The only question I ask really is those things that are taken out because you don't feel that there is a need for them, is it something where you say every 3 or 4 years, you go back and just make sure that they're still doing exactly what you want to do, rather than just being, they're fine, we can forget them?
Yes, so it happens mostly with key financial audits, and what I built up, it's a famous spreadsheet called the Audit Universe, and in that spreadsheet I'm listing all the historic activity, current and potentially future activity we can deliver at the council. Of course, whenever I'm revisiting the plan every single year, I will consider including those areas we left out, if you like, and that were not included as part of an annual review. We do consider those, and as you well said, Councillor, we can include them either by every 2, 3, 5 years, depending on the risk, or if we consider they had any changes in the control environment or processes or structure or legislation changed, and we really need to go in again and confirm they are up to date with any external legislation or any other changes. Yes, we will consider those. They won't be left out forever.
Thank you.
Thank you. And can I just ask one last question on, I'm still in this 5.2, the very last line, part of the consideration. I'm assuming that can read that as the fee. That's what you're saying.
Yeah.
Last line on page 11.
I think we have a different number in there. Is it page 11 of the report pack?
Yes.
Oh, yeah, sorry. Financial implications, yeah, sorry.
Last line.
Any
Part
such
of the
implications?
consideration, and I'm just saying the consideration is another word for fee in that context. That's the question.
Sorry, are you referring to the last sentence?
Yes,
Any
part of the
such implications?
consideration, and I'm just asking, consideration is also the fee. That's the context of that.
No, I think this refers to when we raise a recommendation which potentially is an issue in a relevant service area. Management has to decide whether
Oh, I see what you're getting at.
implementing
Okay.
the recommendation has financial implications. But
Got it. Lovely.
hopefully,
Thank you.
okay, that's right.
I misread it. Thank you for that. Right, item 7. So I don't see any other questions. So I'm going to go to the recommendation. Is that the committee is asked to comment, which we have on the detailed internal audit plan for 2022 and 2023. So we need to vote. Thank you. So that's carried. Thank you very much indeed. Right, that brings us to item 8. And Stephen, this is for you.
Tom Parker.
Oh, sorry, it's Tom.
Thank you, Chairman.
This is your show.
This is my show for a bit. You have 3 more scheduled meetings. As we've been discussing this evening, there are matters that will come back in addition to the items shown there. But you'll notice that you've got internal audit reporting in both November and February. At the moment, we don't have business for the 13th of December. And at your last meeting was raised about Treasury Management training. And we might well put that in on that date if that suits members.
Thank you, Tom. Has anybody got any comments on this? Well, I can just see the excitement is about the 13th of December.
Can I make a very brief point on that? Just on that and the potential for the 13th of December, I mean, we'll obviously consult with Chairman in more detail. I mean, personally, I do get quite excited about Treasury Management training, which is probably why I do the work I do. But I think, I mean, Tom is right. I think members have expressed a desire to have something like this. What I would say about it, we probably will be going to link as our advisors to do a significant part of that, and there is a certain degree of setup. So, I mean, if people feel that they don't want to do this, I'd rather not set it up and then I'm sitting there with a link advisor and perhaps Councillor Pulver and 1 or 2 others. So, and it's not necessarily a free line whip, but in terms of the committee's responsibility and the responsibility of members, I think it is an important part of it. So if members are happy to go a whole lot ahead, I would say, yes, absolutely, let's do that. The onus is on myself and Link to make sure it's relevant, interesting, and gets the message across in a non-jargonistic fashion. So that's the delivery that we take of it. But I would also ask that members go with us, and if we set it up, that they do come along. and we will make it as interesting as we possibly can, because I believe it is an interesting topic. And things that have happened in the past demonstrate that how interesting it can be. We've talked about them already in this meeting.
So what do councillors think?
Yes, Chairman, I'm quite happy to attend the training. I'm even slightly interested, well, a lot more than slightly interested. I think we're lucky we have a stable financial situation, and hopefully it doesn't get too interesting. I would just raise the issue around May elections coming up, and whether that is the best time, or whether in terms of we may need to hold it anyway after the elections, in terms of informing membership of the committee.
Stephen, can I ask if is there a cost implication?
There is a cost implication of putting the training on, yes.
Significant?
I would say good value, but material as opposed to significant. So there is a cost implication. Obviously, it is done in person. We get fairly senior people along from the Treasury Management Advisors who know what they're talking about, so they do get paid for it. I mean, I take the point you make about the election, and it's kind of, there's probably never a right time to do this. My thinking, though, is as we have a gap in the programme in December, as members have expressed an interest in doing it, it seems to me a virtuous thing to be doing. If we need to rerun it post-election, so be it. Or if we have a similar makeup of this committee, we might feel that we don't need to do that. Also, I think if one is being honest, if this is, and I believe it hasn't been done here for some years, but once it's run once, there's a possibility of using some of that material perhaps with newer members rather than redoing the whole event. But I don't think there's a right or a wrong answer to this question, to be honest. It's you know, how members want to go forward with this. If you say, well, actually, we think we are comfortable with what we're doing now, let's delay until after the election when we might have new members, I will absolutely take delivery of that. But as Thomas said, we have the opportunity to do it in December.
Well, Councillor Bell, have you got a comment you'd like to make? No, I just saw you draw a breath, that's all. Because otherwise I'm going to ask councillors generally, because Councillor Hicks has made a point. We don't need to waste money. On the other hand, training is never wasted. If I went round to councillors and asked them how they felt about it, Councillor Stockwell, would you prefer to have it, or would you prefer to delay it?
I really don't mind, but having said that, there's always an opportunity to invite other councillors who are not on this particular committee, because it could enthuse them about audit. Yes. Not many people get enthused about audit, so we could perhaps encourage them in that direction. So there is that sort of knock-on effect of training people who are looking to do something slightly different among the membership.
Okay, that's a good thought. Councillor Cornish, what would you prefer?
I agree. I think it's an opportunity to widen it. I'd be happy to attend in December.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Gibson?
I think this came up earlier at my request at the last meeting when it was highlighted. I'm firmly in favour of training, even if it's only for one meeting.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Bell?
My screen seems to have frozen up. It's still same time. Oh. I don't know what's happening. Anyway, I believe that what Councillor Stockwell said, there are any number of variables, but I think to plan for what is a good execution will embrace all changes. So I think that that's exactly what we should do.
Councillor Hicks?
Yes, happy.
Okay. So I think there's your answer.
I'll put that forward.
Thank you very much. And by which time you will have come back with some little bullet points as to what you're expecting of this committee, albeit may all be changed in May. And so it's the good news, bad news. As officers, you keep your jobs. As councillors, we don't. It's as simple as that. So that brings us then to the Sorry, councillor.
Thing, please. Yeah, on the November one. November meeting, we were talking about having the SLA report. I know we've got the guys coming back from Ada. And we were going to have a report on the, I think that's, you're doing that one, I believe, just so that members know that within part of that Treasury management activity, there will be the SLA report to be looked at.
Yes, yeah, very much so. And their interaction with Link too, as to where things go wrong, where is it? So, councillors, that brings us to the recommendation in item 3. The committee recommends to note the committee's work programme as set out in paragraph 5 of this report. And I would ask you to vote accordingly. That's all carried. Thank you very much. In item 9, questions pursuant to rule 10.2, do you know to which to begin? I have none. So councillors, that concludes the meeting. I thank you for your diligence and your time, and I ask that members remain in place for a few moments until we're indicated that live stream has ended. And thank you for your interest and thank you for coming. Good evening.